thank you so much for coming along today. It's this is a first for us as well, and one that we hope we can continue to develop across the networks and the hubs. So just to give you a bit of an introduction before I move on to the theme of today, LSE Generate has been supporting students for the last few years, and alumni too. And what we've noticed is that obviously, as you will know, being alumni, a lot of you, the number of international students is an all-time high. I think we're the most international school in the country, if not the world. And for that reason, we're looking to support alumni innovators wherever they are in the world. And the team and I have done a whole ton of research, really kind of understanding better where those key hubs might well be. So where there is a great kind of contingent of LSE alumni, where there's either an emerging or an established ecosystem, and where there's some really exciting partners for us to kind of collaborate with. And we've done quite a bit of research over the last 18 months, and we've come up with a number of international chapters that we are looking. The main aim is to really support and nurture them, and to really kind of bring them into the Generate fold so that they can be mentored, they can be supported, whether that's through co-working space or funding or whatever opportunities come by in those individual hubs. But what is particularly magical about the LSE network, and you will know if you've studied there, is that international link, the kind of connections that you guys build together when you work across those chapters. And so to that end, we've really decided to come together today after quite a bit of interest between these two geographies. And really just hear a little bit more about that kind of cross-global collaboration, just hear a little bit about what alumni are doing, and just also answer any questions and get some insights and feedback from the audience here today. So what I'll do is I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, but just to kind of give you a kind of a high-level explanation of who's here today. We've got Adeyesi, who's Country Director at the UK Nigeria Tech Hub. And the role of the Tech Hub is really as an enabler and kind of ecosystem builder in boosting Nigeria's ecosystem. And they've been doing that over the last, or Adesi's been doing that over the last 5 years. And we've then got Miriam, who we're delighted to actually meet in person at the launch of our Dubai Hub. And she's Head of Strategic Partnerships at ADGM. An LSE alum, and their role, I'm sure she'll go into it a little bit more now, but is an ecosystem enabler and also fintech regulator, alongside providing a whole other kind of plethora of opportunities for the UAE ecosystem players. And then we also have Ayula, who's co-founder of Cycle Technologies, also from Nigeria and currently scaling his business from the UAE. So a brilliant kind of crossover there, and he's going to be sharing his experiences from both countries, highlighting the similarities and also the differences in both ecosystems. So Adeze, I wonder if I could start with you, if you'd like to kind of introduce yourself in a bit more detail, and maybe highlight some of the insights that you've kind of garnered over the last, is it 5 years that you've been working at the Tech Hub?
Hi, everybody. My name is Adeze Shoko, and I'm the country director for the UK Nigeria Tech Hub. And my work really is to promote successful digital ecosystems in Nigeria. And what that means is ensuring that we have the enabling environment to support startup growth, to support talent development, to support investments, whether it's, mostly from the VC space and the angel investment space, and to facilitate linkages between Nigeria and the UK. So how do we support collaborations between both countries in this space? And what we've been seeing in Nigeria is quite interesting. Over the past 5 years, we've been seeing a steady growth in terms of the ecosystem. For example, we've been seeing lots of VC investment. Lately, I think last year we recorded $5.2 billion worth of investment. Mostly, actually, I think fintech takes 70% of that. But it's been great, and why it's interesting is that while the tech sector is growing rapidly, it's growing in the midst of a pandemic, it's growing in the midst of economic recession, it's growing in the midst of inflation. Currently, we are struggling with fuel prices, scarcity of fuel in the country. And so we are seeing this growth. And I think the big question is, how do we maximize this opportunity and let that trickle down into economic development versus economic growth alone? Now, ICT is contributing more to GDP. That's great. But how do we adopt a targeted collaborative approach to ensure that this growth translates to economic development and causes inclusive growth for everyone? So that's what we are seeing in Nigeria, and there are a couple of initiatives and ideas that we're thinking around with the community, and I can share that as we go along the conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Adizzy. And Miriam, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, LJ. My name is Miriam Kiwana. I head strategic partnerships at ADGM, like mentioned LJ. Before that, I used to head entrepreneurship and innovation at ADGM, which stands for Abu Dhabi Global Markets. For us as an international financial center, we play a crucial role in terms of being an enabler that helps the tech ecosystem development, specifically in Abu Dhabi. In my experience over the last 5 years, the ecosystem has absolutely exploded. As you already know, probably the UAE has been leading or at the forefront of supporting the growth of the ecosystem. But what we're seeing now is sort of not only within the UAE, but also around sort of the GCC and MENA region, there are different markets coming up sort of with what I would call complementary ecosystems. And like Adiza mentioned as well, in the UAE, fintech is one of the leading sectors, and we're well positioned to really lead that. We are considered a thought leader and a leading hub when it comes to fintech and specifically digital assets. We have seen exponential growth in this space. What makes us really different from probably other free zones or international financial centers, the fact that we are anchored on the English common law, which is very attractive, obviously, for when it comes to FDI and international investors and companies. But not only that, we also cater for companies. We have over 4,900 companies, and we cater for anything from tech startups across different verticals, all the way to large institutions, family businesses, as well as funds and VCs that are very important for the building or development of this ecosystem. We are also the home, as an enabler, we're also the home of Hub 71, which is also a global tech ecosystem that is attracting founders from across the globe. And we have seen really sort of interesting growth in priority sectors such as fintech, agri-tech, edtech, health tech. So it's very interesting to see that change and development, and to see also investors coming in, not only from the region. What we're seeing is that international VCs and investors coming into the market, which is definitely a shift from previous experience.
Yeah, no, it definitely felt that when we were out there. Maybe just to kind of both of you, it definitely. It's evident that the kind of trade volume is exceeding a huge amount of money, especially between the UAE and Nigeria at the moment. As both countries very much enter this new era of growth and prosperity. What do you think that those kind of that surge in trade can really be attributed to? Is it kind of economic reforms? Is it the ease of, I know that the visa restrictions have been eased. Obviously, you've got improved connectivity. Can you kind of put a finger on what it might be that's attributed to these kind of significant developments and opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at it, the nature of the progressive governments in the UAE, I think definitely they played a huge role in sort of improving the relationships, obviously, with different markets. And one of those markets in Nigeria, we have tax treaties in place, we have trade delegations are in place. Obviously, policies have been changed as well to welcome to improve the ease of doing business, but also welcome sort of founders or businesses that are looking to either launch or expand in the MENA region on a broader scale. UAE is strategically located, I believe, to actually really serve as a bridge between sort of Africa, Asia, and Europe. So we're very well positioned. I believe sort of this is one of the key reasons why, and given its growth over the last decade at least, it makes it very easy for people to set up and to do business from here.
That's great. And Adesi, does that chime with you in terms of the kind of recent growth, economic growth and prosperity over in Nigeria as well? Is it similar? You think it kind of relates to similar factors?
It's quite similar as well, but even with because it's Africa, right? I mean, it's similar, but it has gaps, and I think we're just having this conversation because we just had the UK Nigeria Tech Summit, and we're talking about how amidst the growth we have to be cautious, and cautious in the sense that most of the companies, for example, that are being invested in and not technically Nigerian companies. So it's almost like they're not, you can't really see how it's benefiting. Maybe it's a few jobs, but it's, taxes are not necessarily being paid here. And you can't really see that it's not owned by Nigeria. Other gaps are, around also the types of problems that are being solved. Even though it cuts across, there's fintech and there's healthcare and there's edtech or agri-tech companies, and they are not necessarily solving deeper issues. So it's very superficial type, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just because of the complexity of our development, we want to see more solutions that are solving hard problems, more addressing wicked problems, addressing complex issues. And I think that is where we need different types of collaborations, even with academia and key players, right? To really understand. Most of the startups that build companies have great ideas and just rush to the market, but there's hardly really immersing yourself in the environment, the complex environment of Africa, our issues with policy, our issues with population and things like that, and culture. And then also, coming up with a sustainable business model that is worthy of investment. I mean, we're also seeing a rise in venture philanthropy. We're seeing a rise in impact investing that are also calling for, in addition to financial returns, also calling for impact returns as well. So I think that this is a sort of good opportunity for such types of collaboration for Africa's market to really think through how do we come up with more companies or solutions or startups that are now going to address issues around financial inclusion, around deeper issues around quality of education in underserved communities and things like that. So I think that's where it's a bit tricky for Africa and will require a different lens and a different approach to really adopting technology or really translating that growth to development. So on the startup side is, really how are you tackling hard problems? On the talent side, a lot of our talents are seizing opportunities elsewhere. So our talent is good and they are being, would I say, poached or taken by international companies, which has its sort of economic benefit, but it leaves a gap as well. So are there opportunities for exchange with diaspora? Attracting more VC investment is great, but how do we balance the equation and ensure that the companies, most of the companies invested in are actually retained in Nigeria? I understand that there are regulatory and policy issues around that, but that's why we are also glad that we supported the startup bill, which is like a good step in the right direction to address regulatory issues in Nigeria. So I think that's where I would say it differs.
Yeah, it's a really helpful explanation. The idea that there's this extremely exciting acceleration of startup growth, but the systemic change takes a long time. The policy, regulatory, that lags behind, and it's the patience and the kind of juxtaposition really of those two. That's really helpful. Now, a tangible example of one of these kind of ecosystem players is Ayula, who's kind of straddled between those two geographies. Ayula, do you want to kind of speak to any of those points we've mentioned there, and actually just kind of give personal experience of this?
First of all, thank you guys for having me here. It's a pleasure being with you ladies today. what Miriam and Daisy have said just, kind of like resounds what I'll probably be saying. First of all, in terms of the question you asked about what is actually driving the market or what is driving policies, I think there are two stark differences between the UAE and Nigeria. For the UAE, the government has made it very, very enabling. And, it just makes it easy for you to, there's also a really, really good, I would say, support structure. They strategically in the Middle East, a good location. And the government have embraced that. They have put in a lot of effort in making sure that you would want to come here. You would feel very, very comfortable being here. And that has worked a lot. And you see most of the startup hubs, most of the, I would say, incubators, they have government backing out there, and it's helping a lot. In Nigeria, it then seems that it's more of a market force going towards scaling up. When you have kind of reached your maximum limit in the developed world as a company, scaling up is next going to a different location. And because Nigeria has a huge amount of population, over 200 million, this is a good place to go, There's a huge market, especially when you're talking about things like fintech. People will always buy and sell things. People will always make transactions. The more numbers you have there, the more people will do it. But like Daisy said, it does not just necessarily work copying and pasting what happens or how it works in a developed country and then taking it to a developing country and just paste it there. Because the problems, the environment, the culture are totally different. It is important to have payments, but when you go to Nigeria, would we say payment is one of the biggest problems which we have? Hell no, that's not the case. We have way, way deeper problems. And, those are the problems that actually needs to be solved before you then trying to kind of, solve the other, I would say, quote unquote, like I did say, superficial problems. So basically from that perspective, I think in our own experience, we have also seen that because we're operating in both, I would say, regions. And it came to us, it hit us the hard way though, that it is almost impossible for you to just take a product or a service, copy it and paste it in one place or the other, as Nigeria or the UAE, because these are two very, very different economical setups.
Yes, Maria.
If I may, I would like to comment on this. I know you're absolutely right in terms of what you said about, adoption or adaptation when it comes to, looking at what works in one ecosystem versus in the other. However, I think if we step back and we look at the UAE as an example, about probably 7-10 years ago, if you look at the example of Uber and Careem, yes, when the ecosystem is at an early stage, in a way you need sort of these copycats to kickstart the ecosystem. And based on that learning, what we are noticing now is that we're seeing the exits. But Careem is our first unicorn, right? Which has been a great success story. But if Careem did not sort of copy the Uber or the Lyft and adapted it to the region, they wouldn't be where they are today. So in a way, I used to sort of say the same thing a few years ago, but now looking at the results of that, I think it's not a bad thing, because if the ecosystem is at a very early stage, you sort of need these ideas to be copied and then adopted. Now we're seeing all these exits and these founders that are coming back into the ecosystem, mentoring, reinvesting, helping, build other companies. So, and that's how the compounding effects sort of starts duplicating and really start seeing the ecosystem moving into different phases of growth. So yeah, I agree with you, but in a way, it still helps. I think it's better than nothing.
Well, I think I might come in between both of them, and I would say, yes. I mean, yeah, both markets are different, but I would say that even if it's okay to copy in the beginning, copying in Nigeria's context or in Africa's context, only benefits a certain category, or depending on typically, or what we've seen over the past 5 years is it's not trickling down to a critical mass. So it's support in for example, with tech will support those who have access to some level of internet and smartphones, but you have a vast majority that don't have access to those types of infrastructure that enable them to benefit from some of those innovations that we are copying. So I think while it's good to copy in the interim and then adapt as you go, I think what would be different in our case is to learn the principle or the thinking. What we should be copying is not necessarily the innovation or the innovation or the product or service, is the thinking that we should be copying, the framework. Mm-hmm. So how did they think about it? Sure. And how can we think about that and produce something that works, and not just works for a particular high level or the rich, but works for everyone, So like the thinking around M-Pesa in Kenya, it's a really good level of thinking. You find that works for Africa's type of market. So that type of innovative thinking, but works for everyone. So we should be copying that versus the products and adapting that to our context is my take.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I think UAE has a different challenge, which is when these are exiting to international corporations, which is okay, good in a way, but also want them to exit probably locally or probably IPO or go a different, have diversity when it comes to the exit routes they have. Just to touch on what you said, as well, one thing that we developed, for example, at AGM when it comes to the fintech space, we have something called the Digital Lab. So that allows startups, fintechs, as well as regulators and banks or corporates to work together virtually, regardless of where they're based, to sort of learn from each other and also work on either sort of new concepts, new innovation, POCs, etc. So this could be a way of connecting different ecosystems as well and working together in terms of really looking. And here I'm talking about financial inclusion, which is a very important part of the fintech space as well. Payments, I mean, this is where the knowledge exchange can come in. And it doesn't have to always be physical. This is where like platforms such as the Digital Lab can actually really facilitate that engagement, knowledge exchange, and potentially sort of partnerships for these founders themselves in the long term, rather than sort of doing what Ayula mentioned, is like when a scale-up reaches a point where they need to sort of get a new market, they go commercially looking at the marketing and the sales element of it, rather than really developing the talent locally.
And I guess as well, something like the Digital Lab is a brilliant example of how you kind of remove kind of barriers to entry as well in new markets, because you're going through it together and you're sharing experiences, and that knowledge transfer is just so helpful when it comes to setting up somewhere else. And kind of as opposed to, I guess, a Nigerian company coming to just kind of landing in the UAE. And yes, they've always enjoyed a kind of a strong kind of relationship thanks to the proximity, and its kind of status has always been a preferred hub. But actually there will still be, and I'm sure you can speak to this, the kind of immediate challenges of setting up in a completely different environment. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that's when we're looking for new hubs. We always think, yes, are we supporting the kind of nationals who are going back to build their companies? But actually, how easy would it be for a British person, Nigerian, someone from Europe to go and start up in both of those? So maybe, Miriam, if you can answer that, and Ayula, and then Adesi, when we're thinking about vice versa in Nigeria as well, where we've recently launched a hub in Lagos.
Yeah, absolutely. So just for example, with the Digital Lab, where it comes into win-win situations, that not only you're helping sort of these startup, regardless of where they're coming from, but also you're helping the corporate innovation side of things, and you're helping the regulators stay progressive and enable new innovation to come into the market more easily. So this is where the landing into sort of a different jurisdiction becomes much easier. From our experience, and again, you probably know this already, UAE hosts over 200 nationalities. Okay, we're blessed to have a melting pot of sort of different cultures, and that means also it translates into the tech ecosystem where you have sort of different founders from different countries when they land. And I think this is where the government really has played a huge role at the beginning to make it easier when it comes to doing the ease of doing business, whether that's changing policies, closing the gaps that exist, providing things like golden visas, for example, for founders and highly skilled talent and that's regardless of where you're coming from. You really don't need to be a UAE sort of citizen to tap into those benefits. The incentives that have been provided by the Abu Dhabi government through a program called Garan 21, which means tomorrow 21, and it was meant to be basically a 3-year program that incentivizes founders, VC funds, as well as high skilled talent to come in and really build from Abu Dhabi, with the idea of scaling rather than just sort of expanding from a commercial perspective. That has worked really well for us. And these incentives have been provided without requirements of equity. So, and this, again, I'm saying you can land from the UK or Nigeria or the US, and we have, we are hosting over 400 tech startups in ADGM alone. And as I mentioned, across different verticals. And Hub 71, which I mentioned earlier, the program, which basically allows certain founders or startups that qualify to tap into incentives such as, the living expenses, where they cover accommodation as well as office, sort of office space, as well as other incentive. So they're hosting, I think, over 130 startups so far. And they're coming from all over the world. You name it. You have startups from Greece, UK, US, Germany. And that includes also impact startups. We have over 25 VC funds. We went from literally 1 or 2 VC funds about 3.5 years ago to almost 30 now, sitting within the same space. And this provides an immense sort of opportunity for those founders landing in UAE.
Thanks, Miriam. That's really, really helpful. Would you be able to pop the Tomorrow 21 link in the chat? Yeah. That'd be really helpful. Sure. I can have a little look at that. Ayula, do you want to come in at this point?
Just jump in there. I think looking at UAE and Nigeria, just putting them side by side and just based on my own personal experience, comparing how easy or what you would need to do to get into there. I think to sum it up is from the back of your mind, you have to understand that the UAE structure, the UAE is actually well structured in that, you have, if you're coming from an environment that is well structured, like from the West, you would easily adapt in there. And even if you're not coming from a place that's not structured, you see the structure, you can easily adapt. But in Nigeria, the structure is not fully there. So you have to kind of be ready to, quote unquote, build a structure. Now, the good side there is that if you manage to build a structure, you're actually bringing in way more value. And you're actually covering your ground way more. You're securing your market way more, as opposed to, when the structure is already there for you. So I think 2 things that I have to have in mind is that, especially if you're coming with something that is really innovative, in the UAE, you will most likely already find a structure. A good example of what Miriam mentioned was like the Uber and Kareem. I think even before Uber became a thing, to get a taxi in the UAE was as easy as using an Uber, in that you just need to call or you just walk in front of your door and you see them, So there was already a structure for Uber to just come in. But in Nigeria, getting in there, they even had to realize that, or get into developing world, that they had to start collecting cash payments because, there is no structure ready for that in terms of payments. And they had to create some other way. So I think if you just want to make it in a nutshell, I think, coming from outside the environment, just know there's loads of structure. There's already established structure in the UAE, and in Nigeria, you would have to most likely build your own structure.
Hey, Daisy, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I wanted to really agree that this really is not a structure that it should be, and I think. I think that's where organizations like ours come in and the hubs that exist in the country. But even with that, I think they still need help with understanding how to create soft landing for these types of businesses. And I think learning from Miriam's the Digital Lab is one. I think having that type of program probably run by local actors versus government in our context would be the best way to go. So having the hub, for example, workstation, for example, rather than just focus on, just offering co-working spaces, can just layer on that, working with having a set of government support staff that are part of their hub that thinks about things like visa, or even providing regulatory sandbox type initiatives that for those types of businesses, they're under some kind of regulatory cover for a certain period, just to test out their ideas, or just to make sure that they settle without experiencing any type of government disruption. And soft landing issues like incorporation, marketing, access, and things like that, that helps with people just settling in addition to the co-working space. So I think if we had that kind of structure, and it's something that we should consider, supporting, even test how that would work. I know that there are different hubs that have talked about it, but people have talked about it, haven't necessarily implemented it efficiently. So I think it would be great to learn more about how that digital lab works and see how we can adapt that, especially if we're thinking of having alumni, of members of the diaspora from the international market, thinking about, starting companies in Nigeria, then that kind of structure would be really crucial if they are going to do well, because Nigeria is a risky market, and people who venture into this space and do well are like Avengers. They're like superheroes. Like you gotta have like guts to do business in Nigeria. So not everybody has that. So it's best to create that kind of structure that gives people soft landing to thrive.
When we decided on Nigeria as our first African hub, we were told that if you can do it in Nigeria, you can do it anywhere. So we took them up on that. No, that's super helpful. Thank you. I know that Kwame and Kabir, you're here in the Zoom room. Do you have any comments on what's been said up until now, or any questions that you'd like to ask the room? Feel free to unmute yourself and get involved. Yes, Kabir.
Hi, everyone. Yes, so I actually do a bit of business in Nigeria and have been doing so for the last 5 or 6 years. And I can kind of agree with you. The challenges from a governance point of view or company point of view, there's a lot of issues that I face as a foreigner, but also in terms of structure. I'm based in the UAE, but I do business in Nigeria, so I can kind of see the difference between the two countries, how they operate. And I agree, if Nigeria is able to get its act together and follow some sort of structure like the UAE, or even if you look at an example like Rwanda, I don't know if you looked at Rwanda, but they follow the Singapore model, and they've just done such a fantastic job. And that's encouraged a lot of foreign investment because people feel that I can invest in this country. I know it's safe. It's all structured. It's all clear. I think Nigeria, if Nigeria can overcome that hurdle, I know it's a much bigger country, so there are obviously more challenges. But from my point of view, Nigeria is an amazing country. I love doing business there. So we've got a very different feel to the UAE. So having a sort of a corporate structure in the UAE and also in Nigeria does help from that point of view. So I agree with everything you've said. I just wanted to also mention it's not only the what do you call it, the governance and the company side of things. It's also the currency. The fluctuation in the currency and the devaluing of the currency makes it very challenging. You import products into Nigeria at a certain naira value, and then a few months later or a few days later, the margin on the product you thought you were making is now no longer a margin. You're actually making a loss. That's not just Nigeria. It's many different African countries. But again, that does come from a sort of a government sort of level. How do you sort of stabilize the economy and the currency? So that's just the other point I wanted to bring.
Thanks, Kabir. And just to understand better, what sector, or are you kind of sector agnostic, or are you operating in a certain industry?
So we are in the healthcare space, but not in the pharmaceuticals. We do nutraceuticals and other natural sort of healthcare products, and also just starting this year in cosmetics as well. So at the moment, everything's imported, but we're also now looking at local domestic production of certain cosmetic items and then exporting that from Nigeria as well.
Interesting. We have a high number of alumni startups operating in the natural skincare and cosmetics over in Nigeria, and specifically in hair care as well. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a growing sort of business, and I mean the locals obviously all use these kind of products. I think the challenge right now is getting these products out of Africa, out of Nigeria, and into the West. For the West to benefit from them.
Absolutely. Adeze or Ayula, did you want to come back on the point around the kind of Rwanda Singapore model and the kind of potential of replicating something like that, as Kabir said, the size of Nigeria and all of everything else that you've already mentioned might make that challenging, but what's your feeling towards that point?
Yeah, before I get on that, I have to just mention, I think Kabir is the avenger that Adeze was kind of
yes.
Because
yes.
Really, really, I would say fascinating to hear what you're doing out there, Kabir. Like, really great job. And actually, I am Nigerian by birth and by blood and everything, and still I find it difficult to work in Nigeria. So and a lot of Nigerians do the same. It's not only just restricted to foreigners. As a Nigerian, if you can do any business in Nigeria and succeed really well, you are in the Avenger class, or Avenger League rather. Just to chime in, and we're talking about regarding the model, so I think Adeze tried to touch on that a bit, saying, government versus private. In Nigeria, you would hardly find, and Adeze, correct me if I'm wrong, any facilitating incubator or startup, I would say accelerator that is focused or that was brought up by the government, that was kind of pushed by the government. It's mostly the private sector. Now, this is not a blame. This is just kind of I think, a characteristic of a developing country. Because when you go in developing country, you don't have food, you don't have water, you don't have roads, you don't have electricity. The government has a lot in their hands to take care of. And when you say startup, and they're I remember back in the day when people were talking about solar energy in Nigeria, they're like, we don't even have electricity. What are you talking about solar here, So it's thinking about, the needs, the hierarchy of needs. Startup is unfortunately then put in a very, very far pedestal, as opposed to where you'll be in the UAE, where, almost everything in terms of quote unquote the structure is there. And then you just need to build up, and increase, the quality. So Nigeria, unfortunately, we cannot work in that model because you made a very good example about the currency. No private person can do much about the currency per se. It's very difficult for companies to kind of make the currency stable. So unfortunately, it's deeper than, having just the private sector trying to solve this. We also have to have the government solve this. And trust me, you don't want us to go into politics of Nigeria in this session. That's a totally different, I would say, rat hole. In Rwanda, I would say, first of all, they have done an amazing job. One of the things they have done is also giving us the hope that it's actually possible that this can be done, because what they have managed to do in a short period of time is it's mind-blowing. Just a few years ago, we're talking about a war-stricken country, and today it's one of the fastest growing economy in Africa. So it can be done. There are very many complications and pieces that have to be put in place. We are very hopeful that we will be able to do that in Nigeria, like you said, although I still see that as more of, us giving ourselves excuses. We're a way bigger country. We are way, I would say, diverse, because in Nigeria, we have over 400, 500 different tribes and languages, So it's a mixture of very different people, and all of this comes with, their goods and their bads. So yes, I agree. I don't have the answers. I don't know how this can be solved. I don't think any one person knows it, but I think it's a very valuable discussion, and it's something we need to work towards.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ayo, because it seems very Herculean. It seems like a Herculean task, but I think I'm one of the idealists for Africa, and I don't care. I think it's still possible. And there are two big strands for this to happen. First is the innovators like Kabir, and all the other guys that are doing amazing stuff to keep innovating and creating those businesses that are addressing gaps, that are creating impact. And when it comes to devaluing the Naira, it's really simple. It's let's do more exports. So if we do that, of course, there's policy as well, but that sort of helps to drive to drive policy reform. So there's a part of the entrepreneurs and innovators to tackle hard problems, like I said before. And then there's a part of civil servants, which I'm just realizing that not a lot has gone really into supporting them to adopt innovative practices in government. So like public sector innovation, where they don't really necessarily have to worry about coming up with those government services themselves, but finding a way to partner, what we call public-private sector partnerships. I'm starting to see some of that emerge in Nigeria with the power sector, but I'm thinking rather than partner with very big organizations who have political interest, partnering and collaborating with innovative startup companies to co-create initiatives that will make things better in the country. Still far-fetched because you're still dealing with people who generally have their own interests. But again, we still have to keep trying, right? Because you never know when that right person would be in power and would want to make a difference. So we have to be prepared. But I think adopting this public sector innovation where we equip public servants with this type of thinking and sort of begin to build the capacity to think about collaborating with innovators to make a difference, and just focus on quick win policy initiatives that help to remove these barriers versus complicating the policy initiatives. So when I see different types of policy reports or consultancies, so the different consultants I help with coming up with policy initiatives, this is very complex, and even the person implementing, I feel for the person implementing because I mean they're not even able to understand it, let alone implement it, right? So I think we really need to adapt policies that work for Africa, and sort of work more on the mindset of the people implementing policy. And I think that needs to go hand in hand with the startup ecosystem. Just like even what Miriam said with the digital lab. So we need to have more initiatives that have both government and the ecosystem stakeholders doing work together. And I think that might be a good way to nudge the policy maker side of things.
I really like your point around the kind of innovation within public sector, that kind of broader vision and the knowledge that you need to be innovating within those organizations to get that systemic change that we talked about earlier as well. I know that in the UK we have the a really successful the NHS National Health Service accelerator program around health tech and kind of really bringing exceptional individuals into what is a kind of highly bureaucratic arena to come up with some really promising innovations. And I know in City Hall here in London there's a similar thing. Miriam, do you have any examples of that kind of work that's starting to change the landscape in a really exciting way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a health tech accelerator as well, which is quite unique because you have the regulator of all the hospitals and the insurance companies literally moving their regulations to under ADGM and actually building a health tech to allow new innovations to come into markets, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to. And that's a very good example of probably a sort of a traditional regulator coming in and really being innovative, and we've seen amazing work being done there. I mean, us as a regulator is a good example. I mean, we're considered very progressive. If you look at what we're doing in the digital asset space, in the crypto space, we were the world's first. We launched the world's first comprehensive crypto assets framework. And that has actually, and this has been done already back in 2008, early 2018. And we're really attracting a lot of the sort of serious players in that space. And actually linking that to design, and sort of Ayula mentioned about the currency challenge. I have a different perception about this. I think Africa, with the young talent that it has and the sort of and the youth, I think we're going to see more and more sort of businesses around the digital asset, the payments. I think there will be some leapfrogging. I think I'm not concerned about that. And I think at some point, probably governments will probably embrace that, which again is very progressive, but I think that could be one of the solutions that some of the governments would look for.
Fantastic. Ayula, did you want to come in then?
Yes. So regarding the, just to chime in regarding the aspect of, public-private collaboration, or kind of like, the acceptance and the infusing of, technologies in them. Based on my experience, I've actually, contrary to the popular belief, I've actually experienced that the people in public service, that's most of the public servants, they're also people like us. Majority of them are not politicians. They're working class people who most of the time, when you approach them and you're actually giving some value, they are willing to listen to you and they're willing to adapt it, So there is space to go in there. In our own sector in waste management, we've been able to work with, the public sector a lot. But again, it then boils down to, when you want to work with them, you have to build a structure, because first of all, you cannot just leapfrog and bring in an app, for instance, in a waste management collection network that they don't even have records. So you have to build the records first, So yes, and by all means, we're still dealing with people. We're still dealing with, and most of them are very, very open. They want to also be kind of like, they want to be seen as, they want to be progressive, they want to add value. So it is still very possible to work in that line. But unfortunately, sometimes you see policies like Adede says that are just so disappointing. We had a very good, I would say, good example was the guys who did Uber for bike. They had put in so much money, or go-kart, they put in so much money, they had put in so much investment and time. And then there was a policy that the bikes, it's very popular in Lagos, you have bikes as a mode of transport, they were banned. And overnight, their business went away. So these are the kind of things, yes, there are some instabilities, here and there. But again, in the midst of instabilities, lack of structure, there's lots of opportunities in there.
Yeah. And speaking of opportunity, right? I think for the first time, what gave me hope in the policy and political space in Nigeria was the startup bill. And the Nigerian Startup Bill is now at the parliament, and we're hoping that it will be passed before the next round of elections, right, into law. But what was beautiful about that bill, and that was a process, everybody came together. I mean, government and the ecosystem co-created that bill. And you had the president, endorse it, you had the Minister of Communication, you had civil servants look through the bill and give their own their own recommendations and input. You had the ecosystem. Everybody worked hand in hand to co-create that. And what was amazing is that you had political will like never before. I mean, we had essays to presidents and the vice presidents and staff like working nights, like nudging everybody, to meet certain deadlines. And there's all sorts of excitement. And I hope, that feeling and the excitement and the progress, the milestone that we've had so far in creating that bill, we can translate that into implementation. And so there's still silver lining, there's opportunity amidst, what might seem like a very unstructured and sorry state. There's lots of opportunity. I guess the question is, how do we really maximize those opportunities so that we can leapfrog and probably get and do better than the UAE, maybe.
Yeah, I love the kind of combination between the right people around the table and a real desire for change, and then the real challenge is then the follow-up and making sure that's actioned and is sustainable. But no, that's great. I think it's a great way to end, actually, if I can just kind of ask as well, Ayoola and Miriam, what it is that gives you guys hope about the ecosystem at the moment. Adede used the startup deal as a great example of that. At either kind of within your own ecosystem or kind of the cross-border collaborations as well. Who's going to go first? Miriam, let's put him on mute.
I'm happy to go first. Well, I'm just reflecting while you were asking the question, reflecting about sort of when I have to talk about Abu Dhabi specifically because I know Dubai sort of had an earlier start, but I recall when we started back in 2018, and it's sort of we had barely a small ecosystem that focused mainly on fintech, and now I look at sort of the number and went from literally 5 startups to over 400. It was very tough. We had a lot of challenges. There were still a lot of gaps, Don't forget that in UAE, probably 10 years ago, entrepreneurship was not as sexy as it is today. So people still, struggle to justify that as a mean. I think what gives me hope is sort of the change that we're seeing, the shift, and I think the passionate people that are really sort of coming in to work together to support this the development, whether from the funding ecosystem or the government side, or like as I mentioned, sort of from building PPP initiatives that support that. Founders themselves, again, those who actually built before and went through that journey, coming in and mentoring, supporting, investing. I think that gives me hope, seeing more angel investors coming into the space as well. And the innovation that's coming out of that, I think, is tremendous. Seeing local talent or regional talent sort of build an innovation rather than importing from developed markets also is a great thing. So overall, I think both for UAE and Africa, I'm very passionate about sort of that region as well. I think that the teething problems that sort of the panelists are mentioning are probably similar to what we had in the past, and the UAE is also based on the Singaporean model as well. So in my experience, I think it will speed up as the change starts happening. I think it will happen faster. So it would be great to connect and collaborate with different ecosystems even more, actually, to make that change even faster.
Yeah, I think one thing you're all kind of mentioning is the idea that it does take a village to build an ecosystem, and it's the focus is so often on the founders, but you've mentioned that all of those kind of ecosystem stakeholders are equally as important to move this whole thing forward. No, thank you. Ayula, no pressure, but you've got the finishing remarks.
Yeah, and it might sound like a cliche, but I think one of the hopeful things, one of the things that gave me hope is actually, I think Adesa, you pulled that out of it, because coincidentally, the climate change bill was also just passed in Nigeria. And this started from one of the chair of the committee in the lower house coming to the World Future Energy Summit, and then trying to pick out, I'll say professionals in the space of climate change. He put together a team about 6 years ago. And down the line, a few months back, it was passed. So there is actually, aside, having this fire chat, they're actually real tangible, I would say, exchange in knowledge. And you see that, also in ADGM now, or in the COP71, there is a Nigerian startup that is trying to solve logistics problem. Yes, the UAE is good now in the climate change. They've exchanged some, knowledge to Nigeria. And Nigeria, if you've ever been to Lagos, you can know how deadly the traffic problem could be in logistics. If you can solve logistic problem in Lagos, you can solve it anywhere else. So you then see that there is some interchange. Back in the day, I used to always believe that there was a lot to learn. I used to try to, transport this exchange, from both sides, and see more of this happen now. I think, that gives me a lot of hope.
That's fantastic, and I mean I really feel enthused and kind of invigorated by this talk, and especially as a kind of an expert, hopefully, in knowledge transfer. The LSE, like, you've given us a whole ton of ideas on what we can hopefully do to kind of contribute to this. I know Adesi mentioned the kind of academic component earlier, so thank you so much. Thanks, Kwame, for putting that in as well. I will share this recording afterwards, so if you do know of anyone that you think might be interested in listening to this, because I thought it was just packed full of kind of golden nuggets of wisdom, personal experience, challenges. Really, really fantastic. And thank you to all three of you, as well as Kwame and Kabir, for jumping in, and Laura for organising this. I hope it's the first of many of such discussions as well. You guys, I think, to some extent, have been the guinea pigs, but yeah, the others have got a lot to live up to. Thank you so much. We will be in touch. We'll continue to grow both kind of respective hubs and continue to bring you together. I mentioned the idea of having a summit at the end of this next year is the dream that we would love to realize. But thank you so much. All the best with everything you're doing, engaging with the ecosystem on so many different levels and contributing so much to a better tomorrow, which is really, really exciting. Thank you very, very much, and we shall hopefully see you in real life soon as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, LJ and Laura, for organizing this, and thanks everyone. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.